When I was asked to do this, I was thinking that this was going to go kind of along the way of a roast, where, I would need to come up with some jokes, and we would all joke fondly about John Boles and his foibles and our amusing experiences with him. And I was worried that I would disappoint everyone, but I think mine kind of fits in with some others, because mine is just going to be very straight and kind of gushy and a little earnest and maybe a little embarrassing for all of us. But when I was thinking about my experiences with John, that's kind of what came to me. So here goes. I can honestly say that working with John Boles and the Journal of Southern History has been one of the most intellectually satisfying experiences of my academic career. Honestly. I was very fortunate to publish in the Journal of Southern History, something that I'm extremely proud of. In fact, twice, very proud of that. But even more fortunate to have served on the editorial board for a term under John. I looked back in my computer at all the files that were labeled JSH, and I realized that I had reviewed a lot of manuscripts over the years. But it never felt like a lot, honestly. It never felt like a burden, and it was never like, oh, I can't say no. I actually looked forward to it. It got to be really fun, and I certainly got a lot better at it. And I wouldn't say that about most review work, and I'm sure a lot of people in this room have reviewed for other journals, for grants in your institutions. Sometimes it's not very fun. And usually most experiences as a reviewer are kind of lonely. And this was where I was going to go into a joke. It's kind of like having a lot of first dates that end badly, because most of the stuff that you review, it doesn't really go anywhere. So double-blind review is this great invention, but let's be honest. It's not the most satisfying relationship to enter into if you're the reviewer. And in part, that's because of who we are. As academics, we crave exchange and evaluation. We want to be graded, right, all the time. We at least want responses to our ideas. But by definition, refereeing is this one-way street. So no matter how many sources you felt bound to check up on, how extensive your suggested bibliography, no matter how gently and diplomatically you posed your constructive criticism, no matter how much you struggled to impose some kind of logical order on the thesis as you wrote up your report, there's no response. There's nothing from that author. And this is also in spite of the fact that if you do reviewing right, it's really hard. It's draining. And I think for me, every time I reviewed something for the Journal of Southern History, I always remembered how I felt when I submitted my piece to the Journal of Southern History, which was pretty early in my career. And I was terrified by, what I might get back. When you're a reviewer, you want to be generous and fair. You want to take that author's argument seriously. You want to look for the merit in the research and in the interpretation. And I always think of reviewing as kind of like a puzzle. You get this unfinished piece, various stage of unfinishedness, depending on what you get. And then you take that piece apart and you look at all of the pieces and you try to figure out, do they fit together in the way that the author has arranged them? But then the other thing that you have to do is you have to think about, could they fit together in another way? Or could they fit together if this author added this or that in? So a lot of it is looking at what a manuscript could be, even if it's not quite there yet. And that's what the Journal of Southern History does. And most pieces aren't there when they arrive. Mine wasn't either. And the discouraging part, too, is that a lot of them aren't going to get there for the Journal of Southern History. So it's thankless and sometimes lonely. And again, the work is the same whether you recommend rejection, whether you recommend revision, resubmission, or publication. It's difficult and it's thankless. By the time you hit send to mail off your report into cyberspace, you've spent a lot of time and energy on that author that you'll probably never know, and a piece that may not ever even make it into print, either in the Journal of Southern History or anywhere else. So at most journals, you get this form letter acknowledging that they've received your report from an editor or sometimes just a staff member, right? The only immediate gratification, and that's if you can work yourself up for it, is a kind of warm glow that you might get from doing service. We all have that, right? The warm glow, service well done. But being part of the editorial board of the Journal of Southern History was completely different. It was a collaboration between you and a fantastic editor at one of the best journals in our discipline. What I enjoyed so much about being on the editorial board at the Journal of Southern History was that after doing all this work, I was sharing my conversation with John Boles. Of course, the conversation was always after I submitted my review. He never said anything when you got the piece. Without fail, even if my review was just a little bit past the requested deadline, which I'll admit happened every once in a while, I'd get that wonderful email, almost always with a blank subject line. So there's the roasting. You all know, right? I'd get this wonderful email from John. He'd obviously read the report. He'd weighed it just as carefully as I'd evaluated the manuscript. He'd always thank me, of course. But what made me feel really great was that he took the time to engage with what I'd said about the manuscript. He might share my intrigue with an idea or a thesis, or agree with what I said about the evidence being a little thin here or there. And he'd share my enthusiasm about getting to see that rare gem first before it appeared in print. He took my work as a scholar and, in my opinion, seriously, and that made the work immensely satisfying. John made service on the editorial board genuinely collaborative, and to go back to something Cindy said, it really was an honor to be at that table. And I'm one of those scholars who is not from a top-tier university, and being there is quite an honor. And it was a great joy to collaborate with someone who was so interested in so many things and knew so much. I know that it made me a better reviewer. I know it made me a better writer and a better historian. Now, just in closing, one thing I'm sure that a lot of people would say about John, although I don't think anybody's said this yet, is that he has an incredible memory. So the Journal of Southern History receives a lot of submissions, like, between 80 and 100, sometimes upward of 115, 120 per year. That's a lot of manuscripts. At the annual editorial board meeting, you could chat with him about something you'd read months ago. You could chat with him about something you'd written years ago. And even pieces that weren't going to make it into the journal. And he'd remember that manuscript, and he would remember what you said about it in your report. Now, I'm sure that John probably does have a memory that's better than most of ours, but I think that this is really a measure, too, of just how engaged he was in his work and the people who worked with him. And that's why he's inspired such admiration in all the people who are here today, on the people who worked with him on the editorial board and his staff, who are wonderful. And it's also the reason why the Journal of Southern History has earned a reputation as the best journal, not only in Southern history, but one of the best journals in our entire discipline of history, period. I'm really, really grateful that I got to work with John and the Journal of Southern History. I look forward to continuing to work with the Journal of Southern History. And I know that John has probably earned his retirement after all these years and all this hard work, but I'll be very sad knowing that he's not there anymore.